Joining us now from Washington is Chuck Todd, host of Meet the Press, which airs every Sunday morning at 8 o'clock here on NBC4 Los Angeles. So, Chuck, the poll, CBS News poll, YouGov poll, says that for Democrats, 88% believe it's all about the virus and continuing to contain transmissions, and 62% of Republicans say it's about getting the economy back on track. So there we have it, a political divide over the response to this pandemic, vastly different from what you saw at 9/11 or an earthquake or a fire or a flood. It's a partisan view of this emergency going forward, and that's only going to get worse over time.
I don't know if I agree that it'll get worse over time for one reason, Conan. I do think we might want to just take a step back. It's perfectly reasonable to me if you think about where has this virus impacted the most? In Democratic states, right? It was on the West Coast first, New York massively, New Jersey, Connecticut. A lot of African Americans and Latinos have been impacted by this virus more than whites. So if you look, I think if you just look at the Democratic constituency groups, you look at it, if in metro areas, well, those are Democratic strongholds. In the Republican strongholds, the virus hasn't had the same impact on them. So, and it's been more of the economic impact that many in rural or exurban America have felt. That said, you know, if you look at the models right now, Conan, it is the coast, these Democratic areas are where the virus is starting to dissipate a little bit, or the curves are flattening. And it is in exurban or rural America where the cases are rising. So I do think some of this divide has to do with where who the virus has impacted the most so far. And I say so far because we got a long way to go.
I certainly do. So let's talk about Congressional District 25. You had it right last week. I was all wrong. So this is a district in 2018 that swung to the Democrats by an 8-point win, Katie Hill. Now all of a sudden you had Mike Garcia, no legislative experience, but he's a former Navy fighter pilot who won that district. Does that tell you anything, or because it's a special election in the middle of a pandemic, it really doesn't bear much of a resemblance to what we might see in November?
Look, I think it doesn't bear much resemblance to what we might see in November. However, you know what does follow a blueprint that, frankly, Democrats found success at is what you just described, Mike Garcia. Here's a guy with no political experience, but he was a former fighter pilot. Sounds familiar. Half of the successful 2018 Democratic candidates that won these House seats were people that were running for office for the very first time, had different backgrounds, weren't considered polarizing or political, weren't professional politicians. So in that sense, if the Republican Party can clone Mike Garcia in 100 other districts and have that kind of biography and things like that, you know, that would be a path back to the majority for them. I just don't know if they have that many Mike Garcias out there. And then, look, the math tells the story, and we saw it in the 2018 midterms. You know this better than most. The primary electorate or open primary electorate in general is more Republican. And then in these districts, when November comes along, suddenly a bunch of Democratic votes shows up. So I imagine this is going to be a pretty close race. I do think we can't underplay the impact the scandal had. And I do think in politics in general, political scandals that cost that force special elections and congressional races usually do cost that incumbent party 8 to 10 points. And sure enough, I would argue that there's your 8 to 10 points.
Right, and we're referring to Katie Hill and the scandal regarding her relationship with a staff member or a campaign staff member. Very quickly, at some point, Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, has to leave the basement. He's doing some of these Zoom meetings with a margin of success, but you look at the president, he's out there. You know, he's going to Pennsylvania and he's talking to people at a place making PPE and that kind of things. So, at what point does the DNC and the Biden campaign say, listen, we're going to have to go out and with 6-foot separation or whatever whatever you need, actually talk to real voters?
Look, I think they have more time than they think they do. You know, I think that the following the rule of if your opponent is busy hurting themselves, stay out of the way. Don't draw attention to yourself. So in some ways, let the president run against the president, right? The minute Joe Biden starts doing events, then you present a choice, you present an alternative, and that's something that the Trump folks would like very much. So I think we'll see it. And I think that, frankly, the Biden team is split on this issue because you've got others who say Biden's got a lot of work to do in the Latino community, for instance. And if you want to win Arizona, you want to energize Latino voters, you need to start doing some work on the ground. You need to start making some visits. But I get it. I think the pressure is going to ramp up and that he is going to have to get out of that basement. But I'll tell you, this is such an unusual. I mean, we have two nominees, both of whom are in the high-risk age bracket for this virus. So, it does, I think, complicate campaigning plans for both of them.
Who's on the program?
We'll be speaking with the President's Defense Production Act coordinator, Peter Navarro, also his chief trade advisor. As well as we're going to go dive into the rise of these conspiracy theories and how did this pandemic basically become a New York Times bestseller and become as mainstreamed as it did. So we're going to dig into that a little bit.
Chuck Todd, host of Meet the Press, 8 o'clock Sunday morning. Thank you very much and stay safe.
You too.
NBC4's news conference this week is preempted by NBC Sports. We will be back next Sunday with that program. I'm Conan Nolan. Again, Meet the Press is at the top of the hour. Have a good Sunday.